Ben Hodges is a retired Lieutenant General of the U.S. Army Europe. He was a commanding officer at the U.S. Army Europe. Welcome to the program, General Hodges.
Thank you very much for the privilege.
Ukrainian army continues its offensive operation inside Russia. There have been many advances inside the Kursk region. Institute of Study of War reported even about the 35 kilometers advance of Ukraine deep inside the Kursk region. What did impress you the most in this offensive or incursion of Ukraine inside the Kursk region?
Three things have really impressed me about this. Number one, once again, we have underestimated Ukrainian capabilities for planning, for secrecy, for combined arms, for using all of their capabilities to great effect. We have underestimated that, and we have overestimated Russia's ability to conduct operations in response to it. Now, clearly, Ukraine caught Russia by surprise, just as many in the West were caught by surprise with the size and competence of this operation. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we don't know exactly what the specific objectives are for the Ukrainian government and for the general staff. And we're not entitled to know. I should not know. So what I'm going to say next is only my speculation based on what I see and what I think. But it seems to me that this counteroffensive by the Ukrainians is intended to clear out a large area in the Kursk Oblast in order to deny it as sanctuary for Russian artillery, Russian rocket launchers, Russian efforts to prepare for future operations against Ukraine. So the Ukrainians are denying this area, what I've seen referred to as a Kursk bridgehead, which I think is the right approach. It also is changing the momentum, the conversation, the narrative about what's going on. You don't hear people talking about the inevitability that Russia is going to win. And I suspect that Ukraine actually has a lot more troops and capabilities involved in this than is evident to all of us. Now, I think one of the intended outcomes of this counteroffensive is also to try and relieve some pressure on Ukrainian forces that are in the east, defending Pokrovsk, for example. Although I think we in the West are probably more focused and worried about this than Ukrainian general staff is actually worried about it. The third big impression I have from what I have seen so far is about the Russian response, how inept, slow, and chaotic it has, and ineffective it has been. It has. Putin put the FSB in charge of the response because it's embarrassing for him, obviously, and so he needs to frame this as a terrorist operation by the Ukrainians. So therefore, he puts the FSB in charge of the response. But obviously, FSB, this is not their core competency. They've demonstrated for the last 2.5 years that this is not what they do. And there is no love lost between the general staff and the FSB and the Rosguardia and other elements inside of Russia. And so the general staff is not going to do anything to help FSB be successful in their response. So I think the ineffective command and control and the hatred and rivalries inside of Russia between the different forces is contributing to a very poor response.
Also, it seems like Russian commanders do not want to move its most experienced units from the east of Ukraine to the Kursk region. Do you see this tactics as a wise one, and how could it end this decision-making process, their unwillingness to move its most experienced troops from the war zone on the east of Ukraine to the Kursk region?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons why this has not happened yet. Number one, I just described what I think is a very confused and ineffective command and control structure inside of Russia between the FSB, which is going to run the response to Kursk, to the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the direction of Kursk, and the general staff, which is running operations in the east. The general staff, the Russian general staff, has no real interest in seeing the FSB be successful. So they're not in a hurry to start moving troops away from the direction of Pokrovsk to Kursk. So eventually, at some point, somebody will have to have the authority to make the decision to cause that to happen. I don't think that person has been clearly identified or has made the decision yet that they have to respond. The second thing is the logistics required to move people of any meaningful size over that distance. It's doubtful that there are a lot of trucks or trains standing by ready to start moving people. I mean, you would have to start the clock on that sort of preparation from the time that somebody says, okay, I need to move a brigade or two brigades from here to there. So logistically is a challenge. And then the distances, it's about by over 500 kilometers, let's call it 550 kilometers. If you were to drive a vehicle direct from Pokrovsk to, what is the name of the city, from Zhuja, it's about 550 kilometers. But that's a direct drive through Ukrainian territory over Kharkiv. So that's obviously not a route that Russian forces could take. They would have to go around Ukrainian-controlled areas. And so it's probably closer to 700, 800, 900 kilometers. That's a long time. And that's assuming that they have the hundreds of trucks just standing by ready to start moving people, or the hundreds of rail cars that would be needed. So I doubt that the capabilities are in place yet to move troops, equipment, ammunition necessary to have an effective response.
Also, Medusa reported that Russia would like to use conscripts to try to repel Ukraine's offensive inside Russia. What is your reaction to this?
Well, it shows the desperation on the Russian side, and the political problem for Putin is growing. You know, they have avoided mobilizing people from Moscow and St. Petersburg because they don't want them to feel the effects of this war. And so they already have manpower problems as is, with hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Russian men and women having left the country over the last few years. There are manpower shortages in their industry already. So I think that they are going to have to start making some very, very hard decisions inside Russia about dealing with manpower shortages. Russia does not have endless amounts of people, and certainly they may finally get to the point that the sons of oligarchs and senior officers and government officials might actually have to get involved.
Do you expect Russia to launch another mobilization campaign this year? Bloomberg reported that it could be a possibility for the Russian government.
Yeah, it is a possibility, but that's what I mean. This is a big political decision for the Kremlin, and I think that they would prefer to find other proxies, like more Chechens, for example. I think that's why Volodymyr Putin was recently in Chechnya and other places trying to find more bodies so that he doesn't have to make that hard political decision that you're talking about.
Also, Ukraine has successfully destroyed 3 Russia's key bridges in the Kursk region. Military experts suggest that it could mean there is a potential for the encirclement of Russian troops there. Do you feel that Russians are slowly losing this battle of Kursk?
Well, it certainly, unless the Russians are able to mount an effective response, which they have not done so far, that they will have a difficult time of eliminating this Kursk bridgehead that the Ukrainian Armed Forces have established. And the destruction of those bridges tells me that that shows you one of the limits, perhaps, of how far Ukraine wants to go. Um, and the Russians, who used to be, back during the time of the Soviet Union, they were famous for having excellent river crossing capabilities. I don't think they have that same sort of competence anymore. They certainly have not demonstrated it over the last couple of years. And so their ability to repair bridges or to build military bridging quickly, I think I'm skeptical of that. And certainly when they do try, the Ukrainians will figure out a way to destroy those as well.
From your perspective, what are the chances for the Ukrainian armed forces to move forward and to put Kursk under pressure, to threaten Kursk with artillery fire? How far could Ukrainian troops go from a military point of view and from your personal opinion?
Well, right now, I think they can go as far as they want. And I think that they probably have anticipated the logistical requirements, the Russian responses, and because we don't know, I don't know exactly what the Ukrainian General Staff's objectives are. I can't really accurately forecast how much further they'll go. One of the advantages of this bridgehead that they have created is that they can move the Ukrainians can move their rocket launchers further inside Russia. So even though the United States and UK and Germany have put restrictions on use of some weapon systems inside of Russia, now Ukraine can move its own rocket launchers and drones deeper into Russia in order to attack more Russian airfields, more Russian energy infrastructure, which I think are important improvements in Ukrainian capabilities. I think also they now are threatening the they are threatening the Russian nuclear power plant in Kursk. This creates a real dilemma for Russia and what they're doing around Zaporizhzhia. So I imagine that's part of the consideration, and the capture of the Russian gas hub at Zhuhai also is an important leverage for the Ukrainian side on whether or not they divert the gas or they destroy it or do something else. All of these are benefits of what Ukraine has done thus far.
Wall Street Journal also reported that Ukraine's strikes on those bridges in the Kursk region could be a sign of Ukraine's intention to hold this newly controlled terrain in the Kursk region for a while. What would it take for Ukraine to do that, and what is your reaction to this?
Well, I think that's a reasonable conclusion that the Wall Street Journal has drawn. It certainly, destroying those bridges not only limits Russia's ability, degrades Russia's ability to respond, but it also helps lead to the encirclement of Russian forces there, to which you have already alluded. But I don't think this operation is happening by itself. I think that that Ukrainian General Staff has other things in mind, either in another direction or further. We just don't know this, but I am confident that the General Staff would have taken into account what they would need for engineering capability to protect the shoulders, if you will, of what they have captured thus far, the necessary ammunition, fuel, other logistical considerations. I suspect they are capturing a lot from the Russians that are there. But I think the General Staff and the GUR are so clever. They understand the Russians better than any of us in the West will ever understand the Russians. And I would not think this is the only thing that's going to be happening.
You mentioned about the understanding of the Russian side. Recently, U.S. military intelligence has come to a conclusion that the war in Ukraine becomes a stalemate for both sides. This conclusion has been prepared before Ukraine's incursion inside the Russian territory. Why was Pentagon so wrong about Ukraine's capabilities and Ukraine's ability to conduct surprise attack inside Russia?
Well, I don't know that everybody in the Pentagon was so wrong, but unfortunately, the administration has generally underestimated Ukrainian capabilities and overestimated Russian capabilities. And there are, unfortunately, in Washington, in London, in Berlin, and in other capitals in the West, still too many people who just can't believe that Russia can be defeated, who are willing to accept Russian talking points about Ukrainian shortcomings. And so, all of these things have contributed to our underestimation of Ukraine and overestimation of Russia. Good thing that Ukraine does not listen to us.
Also, The Economist reported that Ukraine's objective in the Kursk region could be to obtain a bargaining chip for negotiations with Russia. Do you feel that this offensive and this current territorial gains of Ukraine put enough pressure on Russia to force Moscow to appropriate and acceptable for Ukraine peaceful settlement of this war?
Well, certainly that could be one of the reasons for what they're doing. That's a reasonable analysis, but I think so many observers from all of these different experts that you are citing, we're all speculating about what we think this is for, what can happen, what are some of the outcomes. These are not unreasonable. I don't know that that's the objective of the government or the general staff. Perhaps it is. But this does create a lot of problems for the Kremlin. What did they do about the hundreds, maybe thousands of troops who have been captured, including lots of Chechens who have been captured? The impact on Russia's oil and gas infrastructure and now threatening their nuclear power infrastructure in the Kursk Oblast. Their inability or the infighting inside Russia between FSB, General Staff, Rosguardia. I think Russia is in a very bad spot right now. And now is the time where we should be putting additional pressure on them, helping Ukraine. And certainly, I'm happy that the U.S. government has not been telling Ukraine, hey, be careful, slow down. I regret that we still have restrictions on what Ukraine can do with ATACMS, but at least we're not seeing or hearing as much warnings from Mr. Sullivan, for example, to Ukraine about, hey, take it easy.
Let's cover also Russian President Putin and his elites. What do Vladimir Putin and his people around him think about this situation? What do they feel right now from your perspective?
So, of course, I don't know, I can't possibly know exactly what's going on inside the minds of Putin and the people around him. It's interesting that every time there is a huge problem or crisis in Russia, Putin manages to put a lot of distance between himself and what's happening so that he's not personally associated with the disaster. The fact that he's in Azerbaijan and in Chechnya here the last several days while this is happening is the latest example of this. Now, perhaps he doesn't really know what's happening. Perhaps, as often happens in a very dictatorial, centralized government or command and control system, people are reluctant to tell the great leader exactly what's happening. That could be the case here. I don't know. I have never been able to fully understand the Russian population, but I don't have any confidence that the Russian people will rise up the way that Ukrainian people did during the time of Maidan. I don't see that happening in Russia. I think the internal security forces are too strong, and most people who criticize the government end up dead or in jail. And oligarchs who do not deliver or show adequate loyalty end up dead as well. So it's hard for me to gauge accurately what's going on inside Russia. I suspect that Ukrainian government, Ukrainian general staff has a much better feel for that than I would.
I would like also to ask you about the communication between Ukraine and the West. The Economist reported that the West was not informed about this operation by Ukraine because there were two incidents in the previous time. Two previous operations were undermined by the West. There was one operation was leaked to the Russian side, another Ukraine was warned against. Another operation. What is your take on this? Do you feel that there is enough safety in these communication lines between Ukraine and the United States?
I think the government in Kyiv is correct and wise to be very, very careful about what information they share with anybody. That would be normal. I think that probably there is still trust and cooperation in certain channels, intelligence sharing, for example. I'm confident that the U.S. and UK and some others are providing helpful intelligence to Ukraine. I would hope so. But, one of the common practices is to, even with your closest allies, and when we do it inside the United States, everybody doesn't know everything. You compartmentalize based on who needs to know certain things. So to me, it would be a correct thing for Ukraine to be very, very careful about compartmentalization of information associated with this operation.
I would like also to quote one official of the Biden administration. Ukraine does not need to use British Storm Shadow missiles inside Russian territory because homemade drones can do more damage to Russian forces, the Biden administration official told The Telegraph. Why do they think so?
Well, why would anybody think that person knows anything about military operations? I mean, that's the kind of thinking and statement that is not only unhelpful, it's also foolish. We should not be telling Ukraine how to use what sort of weapons. But this reflects this continuing failure inside our government by many people to understand what's required to help Ukraine win the war. Instead of telling them use this instead of this, we should shut up, get out of the way, and give Ukraine what's needed to win.
Also, let's cover U.S. administration politics regarding Ukraine. Do you feel that those people and officials who feared about escalation, nuclear escalation, has finally understood that they were wrong?
I doubt it. Clearly, we have been wrong. It's been very frustrating for me for the last couple of years that at the self-deterrence by the U.S. government, that our continued excessive fear that Russia might use a nuclear weapon has prevented us from doing what needed to be done. Hopefully, some people are finally realizing that this has been wrong, but I think there still are too many people out there who cannot accept that they have been so wrong. I've only got like 2 more minutes, okay?
Yeah, and my last question for you, if there is more movement of Ukraine deep inside the Kursk region, how could it influence the Western philosophy on providing Ukraine with long-range missiles, drones? Do you feel that it could lead to permission for Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia with long-range cruise missiles and ATACMS missiles?
I don't know that, of course, but I certainly hope so. This is part of Ukraine defending itself against Russian air attacks and drones and glide bombs, being able to destroy Russian airfields from which those attacks have been launched, and also helping Ukraine to destroy Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, which generates the money necessary for Russia to stay in the war. I think, we should recognize that it is in the interest of the West that Ukraine is successful and defeats Russia, and we should give Ukraine everything it needs without restriction in order to help defeat Russia.
Thank you, General Hodges, for your time and for your support for Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much for this privilege. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you, General Hodges.